Welcome to the Holy Spirit's Curriculum of Joy podcast. My name is Wanaka Oberhuber, and I'm your host. My guest today is Robert Meagher. Hi, welcome.
Hello, Wanaka.
So happy to have you here. And you've been an admin of a ACIM group since many years. So we've been joining in that way since many years, and I'm really curious to get to know you. And I'm sure everyone else here will also enjoy getting to know you. So I'd like to start with a question that I ask every guest when they come on the first time is, how did you get to see the world the way you do
today? The simple and straightforward answer might be when I began studying A Course in Miracles, and that was in 2009. And I had no idea at the time how that new vision would unfold. But sure enough, as you study the Course, and the more you study it, the more it presents you with the opportunity to see the world differently. And as you read the text and practice the workbook, those opportunities abound in every moment of every day. The reality, I think, the heavenly reality is I was invited to begin seeing the world in a different way from the moment I came into this place and this space.
Well, let's unravel it a little bit more. Let's go deeper into that. So, and don't forget to turn your mic off when I'm speaking.
Tell me, how do I do that?
The same way you turned it on at the beginning. You just press that same mic symbol. Okay. So you were speaking about how the encounter with A Course in Miracles gave you the opportunity to recognize that you were called to change your mind about the world. And now you were speaking about the greater picture, as you understand it, is that it was from the moment you got into a place of separation. I think that's what you're alluding to. There was the solution alongside. So maybe you would like to speak about how you became aware that there was a solution alongside your ideas of separation, or probably misery, as most of us see it. Anyways, how you became aware of
that. You mean how I became aware from the time that I came into this time and space?
Wherever you want to start from. any way goes.
Well, I'm gazing off because it's just it's such a wonderful opportunity to reflect on this. I remember in 2006, I had an experience it was the closest experience I've had of hearing a voice to direct me. Now, this wasn't an audible voice. It was a voice, as I've heard Helen Schuckman describe it. It kind of comes in words that you see in your mind or your mind's eye. And the message was clear and unequivocal, and it was very simple. And the message said, Rob, you need to simplify your life. And that was it. Now, what I extrapolated from that, although the message wasn't that, it wasn't what I'm now going to share, but I extrapolated from that initial, Rob, you need to change your life, that I needed to change my life in 3 ways. Financially, relationship-wise, as well as materially. So those were the 3 that I extrapolated from that. financially, relationally, my relationships with people, okay, and materially. And then a series of events unfolded in the months and the years that followed that when I look back now, it was clear. It was a pathway to find the course come into my life. And then one could say the rest is history in terms of seeing the world differently. But my earlier comment want to go about, and you were so astute to reframe my awareness, if you want to call it that seeing the world differently became an opportunity since I've come into this time and space. And you, again, very astutely brought up the whole idea. Up until, I'll say 2009, even in 2006, where I got this message or I heard this voice, was unaware of the whole idea and the whole concept of separation. I mean, we're living in the illusion and we play right along with it. But again, when I look back now, I see it was all part of the journey, if I want to call it that. And in that way, I'm absolutely fine with all of it. It's led me to where I am today, which is a space that I'm very, very grateful for.
Yeah. Yes, it's a very important journey to reflect, because you want people, I mean, the Course wants us to get into the present moment, which is closest to eternity, so that then a shift can happen that is given, right? Not one that we actively pursue or could in any way influence, but we can get ready so that it can happen. And so getting into the present moment of joy and happiness, as the Course in Miracles says, is our right and is what God wants for us. And joining and remembering that our will and God's will are one, as the Course in Miracles says. What steps did you go through in this whole thing? Because you said it's 2006 you heard the voice, and then things must have shifted in your life because you got these 3 ideas that need to be changed. How do I change them, right? And then after 3 years, if I understand correctly, you encountered A Course in Miracles that once again must have reaffirmed a lot of things that had been coming up before that.
You're very intuitive, Wanako. The series of events leading up to the Course being introduced to my life were heaven sent. So in the fall of 2009, after 2 years of planning, so again, 2006, the voice, 2007, I start to plan to make a career transition, a career change, because I had been doing what I had been doing for more than 20 years at the time. And so finally in the fall, late summer, 2009, I left my position at that time in corporate Canada and set myself adrift, purposely, consciously, because I wanted to find out a new way of living in this world. You know, very much wanted to do something different with my life, but I had no idea what it was. I hadn't begun your traditional job search or networking before I left, because of the responsibilities I had. I still wanted to devote myself to what I was doing. So anyway, left, and it was a Friday, and on the Monday I began in earnest the networking. And in the days that ensued, I met with 3 acquaintances. I sometimes refer to them as the wise men and women, the 3 wise men and women. And doing what might be thought of as your typical networking. What opportunities have you heard of? Is there someone you think that I should, contact? Each stopped me at a point in our coffee and said to me and asked me, at the time, it was the most bizarre question out of left field. They asked, have you ever thought of ministry? Now understand that these three people didn't know each other. It wasn't like Sally called John the night before and said, you're having coffee with Rob tomorrow morning and, make sure to ask him this question. They didn't know each other. And the first person who asked me the question, have you ever thought of ministry? The words that came out of my mouth was, are you crazy? The second person I had met with, and the same question came out. I said, are you crazy? Not seeing any connection at all, but thinking it kind of odd that this is the second person that's asking me this question. And then, of course, the third one. This is almost in 3 days. And before the words came out of my mouth, are you crazy? I stopped and I asked, what is it you're seeing in me that makes you ask that question? And so they explained. And I listened, and I can remember feeling this lightness, this kind of lifting away of a cloud of weight. I started to feel lighter. So they answered the question, and I may have asked a couple more, but then we shifted back to traditional networking. Have you heard of any opportunities, anyone you think I should speak to? And at the time I was living maybe 5 or 6 blocks away from the coffee shop, where on that fateful day, and one might say faithful day, that the third person in about 3 days asks me the same question. Of course, my mind was just reeling. Like, what is it these three people are asking me this question? And I'm walking home. And before I get home, and again, it's only about 6 blocks, it came to me. Again, not so much a voice, but it was just a vision of sorts of interfaith ministry. And a year later, almost to the day, I was ordained as an interfaith minister, and the very next day launched the spiritual ministry that I continue to enjoy and offer the Course in Miracles study groups through, in the Course in Miracles focused and centered counseling and psychotherapy. But to back it up a little bit, those 3 very formative coffees that led me down the road of ministry, in the weeks that followed that third coffee, I went to, I guess you could say, a networking-oriented gathering. And there was a gentleman who I met at the gathering that brought up in our exchange A Course in Miracles. And I expressed curiosity. And they said, well, look, why don't we get together for coffee and I'll bring a copy of the book and you can have a glance through it. So in the next few days, we met for coffee, and he had the book. Of course, it was what I affectionately refer to as the Blue Book from the Foundation for Inner Peace. And he said to me, he began our exchange about A Course in Miracles, and he said to me, is there anything at all, he said, you're curious about? And I said, yeah. He said, I am. Psychotherapy. Because my background and my schooling is in psychology. And so at that time, and again, we're talking about 2009, I had an interest in continuing my roots in psychology to study psychotherapy and then practice it. And he smiled. He just smiled. gently. And he opened the book and turned it to, of course, what we affectionately know as one of the, and A Course in Miracles, the third edition, combined volume, and it has a supplement on psychotherapy. And so I opened it up and I started reading it, and my eyes became, really big. And I started reading it, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was some affirmation of sorts that this is what I need to hear. And from that moment, I knew there was something in this book for me. And I very quickly, in the days that followed, if not the next day, got a copy of the book. And true to my nature, being a very kind of systematic and disciplined, individual, started in earnest. Of course, not having any idea of how to approach this massive, massive tome in the book, A Course in Miracles, and began reading right from chapter 1. And just, over the next, I guess it was a few weeks, maybe a month or more, just read right through, chapters 1 through 31. And of course, at the time, barely understanding any of it. And then started the workbook practice, in earnest as soon as I finished the reading, assuming at the time, of course, that, well, that's what one does, right? One has to read the whole text and hopefully understand it before one begins the workbook. Of course, now I understand that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. But that was my kind of introduction to A Course in Miracles. It was, again, part of that path of each brother and sister I would meet that led me to the Course. And then, once I laid my eyes on it, my fingers on it, and dare I say my heart on it, I knew it was for me. And I was just sharing with someone this morning that it's been, well, that was 2009. So we're approaching, 14, 15 years studying the Course. And it's as remarkable to me today as it ever was. And it's something that in some ways I can't imagine living a life without it. And yet the paradox is the Course itself says in lesson 189, throw it away. Just bring your empty hands and your open hearts to God. You don't need the book. It's just a form. But all that to say, it's something that I can see studying in the book form for many years to come. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing you were saying about not understanding it. I think I've heard that quite often, that people have the feeling they didn't understand what was in the book. But there's also those who have that experience of saying it's a confirmation of what I was thinking before that. And was there any element of that in your experience as well? Because you said you liked it, you could read it for hours and hours, it looks like, right? So you must have had something that kept you going, something that was attaching to what you were experiencing or thinking before that.
Again, very intuitive of you, Wanako. What I would experience typically is there would always be a sentence in a section that I would come across that would just stop me in my tracks. I'd stop reading and I'd probably reread the sentence. And it felt like an epiphany of sorts. And as I worked my way through the text, those epiphanies became more frequent. Probably more so due with the fact that I just was becoming more and more comfortable with the way the course is written, its cadence, its use of the English language, its use of poetry. And it grew from that sentence to that paragraph to what that whole section was saying, and being able to identify with what that whole section was saying, to then remembering, oh, it talked about that back there, but this seems now to be showing a different element of it. And to start to be able to connect some of the foundational tenets of the teaching, and once again, have it resonate with me. Within me, to this resonance that continues to grow today. Well, there's still parts of it that I read it and it's, but I can trust now enough in the process of realizing that that's actually not the case. I'm getting it. It's just there's a blockage that I'm putting up. That I'm. There's a reason that I don't want to see it right now. I'll get it. I'll just relax, Rob. It'll come. The fog will clear. Next, move on, because I can remember. To backtrack a little bit, that fateful meeting where I was introduced to the course and handed the book, there was a point with that initial dear soul who jokingly said, if you're reading and you don't understand what you're reading, just rip the page out and continue to go along. And they were being facetious, obviously. But the way I translated it when I started working with the course and reading the course is if I started reading a section and it stopped making sense, which could be after the first sentence or after the first paragraph or after a few paragraphs, I would simply skip to the next section. And then I would start reading that section. And I became aware that while in my judgments, I was thinking, that's not ideal, Rob. To be reading along and then just skipping parts of it and going to the next section. But I knew there wasn't any point in continuing on because I wasn't getting it, whatever it was supposed to be. And so I carried on that way for maybe the first 5 or 6 chapters, but then the pace at which I would skip, would slow down. And I began to tolerate more and more what it was telling me and what I was reading. Because more and more was seeping in. I can't say, though, I was fully appreciating what it was that was seeping in. I have much more of an appreciation for that, today. But at the time, it felt there was a compelling nature to the Course in Miracles. There was something compelling me. I knew there was something. I knew there was something there. I knew there was a purpose, and I knew enough to trust it. Thank goodness. And that continues to be my modus operandi, is to just trust it. it will reveal itself through me if I just stay committed to it, through my daily practice, through my daily readings, through the interactions I have with people like you and other students and teachers in the study groups that join me each week.
Yeah, it's a fascinating process. I never heard it in that way, but I'm sure there's so many different ways that people encounter it. It's really fascinating. So, yeah, what I think is also very interesting is you're one of the people who actually had a background in psychology before even touching on A Course in Miracles. And we know that the authors were psychologists, and many of there were early people in it like Jerry Jampolsky and others who also were psychologists. So it looks like it's a book that appeals to psychologists as well, and maybe you have a connection with the great community of psychologists who are interested in A Course in Miracles.
Actually, the short answer to the question, if it was a question, is no, I actually don't. But that didn't matter. That didn't matter to me. I was finding as I was reading it, and in particular, if you read other versions of A Course in Miracles, which can be a controversial topic, but as I was reading other versions, it was emphasizing more the psychological components, and I embraced that because what revealed itself to me was how much I longed to bring together the spiritual and the psychological, to bring them together. And this was something I found a home in and with A Course in Miracles. And the psychotherapy I went on to study was psychological, spiritual psychotherapy. And if one asked me, well, what does that look and feel like? And I would just simply say, read the supplement in A Course in Miracles on psychotherapy. That's what it is. And my early training and study in psychology was so far removed, from the psychology or the psychotherapy of A Course in Miracles. Of course, my study in psychology was based in the psychoanalytic theories. And while there is some material that would reveal a spiritual dimension to, say, Freud or Jung's work, it was certainly not mainstream. It was certainly not out there. In my experience, anyway, I'm not saying it's the way it is, but my experience when I was schooled in psychology and the psychoanalytic methods, and of course behaviorism was there as well, there wasn't an iota of a spiritual aspect to the discipline. Now, it's possible that I wasn't open to it at the time, and therefore not ready to see it or not ready to hear it. But I longed for that joining, that relationship, that interconnectedness. And the Course in Miracles was, and continues to be, one of those joinings of the two disciplines. There are others, but A Course in Miracles is just a wonderful coming together in the very broad sense of science and spirituality.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways in which you can see that coming together in psychology with spiritual. views, but also in other sciences. But anyways, for instance, there's Wilhelm Reich. I don't know if you've heard of him, who had his own psychological ways of doing things, and there's many others. Anyways, yeah, I've been interested in it, but I also did hear about A Course in Miracles the first time in Jerry Jampolsky's book, Love is Letting Go of Fear. So that's also a psychologist. So anyways, like I was mentioning before. So yeah, there's a lot of connection, but also, like I said, with other science. I have a background in anthropology, so religion and consciousness studies, for instance, has a lot of connection to the topics, but also many others. But yes, so that's why I call this podcast is a science podcast, because it's a social science podcast, because I'm an anthropologist from my background. So yeah. So I think that's an important topic to look at, how we connect things, how we connect the dots. I mean, we know that many people like to connect spirituality with physics and quantum theory and so on. But we don't, I don't know exactly the validation for all this, but there's so many ways of connecting the various disciplines. I call this podcast also as an interdisciplinary podcast. So that I always say A Course in Miracles and interdisciplinary synergies. So you are very welcome to talk about those synergies that you discovered in various areas of your life or interests that you've had in your life. And I'd be very curious to hear about that. You said you were in big corporations, and there must be some way that experience informed the way you are experiencing A Course in Miracles, and the way it's giving you power to change your mind about the world.
Before I talk about the synergies, there was something in your sharing just now that you've talked about Gerald Jampolsky a couple of times. And I remember a very important element of giving over to the Course in Miracles early on. And again, this was in 2009, the fall of, when I began to read it. Of course, I'm reading it, but I'm doubting it. You know, of course, now I realize this is the ego at work, you know, not wanting me to go there. You know. And I remember one of the influencing factors, I'm not going to say exclusively, but it was a significant influencing factor, was I began to learn, like you, of all those, I'll refer to them as modern day luminaries, like Gerald Jampolsky, that were self-proclaimed students of the Course. And so I became aware of all these people. So, you know, Marianne Williamson, Eckhart Tolle, Deepak Chopra, and the list went on, Greg Braden, and I'm trying now to remember, so I'll forget, and move on. Wayne Dyer, long list of all of these people. And I thought to myself, God, if there's something they're seeing in it, then it must be worthwhile for me. And it compelled me forward further. But in terms of synergies, to speak to that, it's an interesting question, Wanako. Certainly, the feeling of homecoming to my study and love of psychology. I studied as undergrad. As a minor. It wasn't my major during my initial undergrad studies. It was a minor, but I loved it. You know, I took it whenever I had an open course to take. I'd always take a psychology course. It turns out that I was only a few, psychology courses, short of a degree in psychology, but my focus was actually something else at the time, high tech and IT. And I took the psychology in part because it was thought in the program that I was in that the most successful IT people in the discipline that I was studying would be those that married psychology with the technology, because you'd be able to help people understand. But I loved the psychology, and I was just so grateful for the opportunity some 25 years later to kind of go back to it. That is, go back to the psychology. But at the same time, now this divinity aspect was entering the picture. You may recall my mentioning, people asking, well, what about ministry? And I certainly wasn't called or felt a calling to continue on with, divinity studies in the form of the Roman Catholic Church that I grew up in. I mean, that just didn't interest me at all, nor any mainstream, religion or faith tradition. I wanted it to be all-encompassing, all-inclusive. I didn't want there to be any separation, to use the word. And I was by default separating myself off from the others, and I just wasn't interested in that. It just didn't feel right. And so this synergy, this coming together of the opportunity to dive back into the psychology and go further with it through the psychotherapy, and also marry with it spirituality, was just such a blessing. I'm a big proponent and advocate of living the Course in my daily life. I certainly welcome those students and teachers who feel very drawn to the theoretical nature of the Course through the text. And there are those students and teachers that that's where their heart lies. And then there are those students and teachers, their heart lies in the workbook, or for some, their heart lies in the manual for teachers or the supplements. And I guess you could say I'm more oriented towards the workbook, but more specifically, how are we living the Course in our daily life? It's all fun and good to study the text, but as the workbook says in the introduction, without the practical application of the Course, the text just becomes a series of abstractions. And I bring that up in the context of synergy, because what the Course has allowed me to do, not only through the workbook, but through the continuous reading and study of the text, is it's allowed me to flow with life more than I ever used to allow life to unfold on its terms, not on my terms, not to fight with life, but to flow with it. And many synergies abound when I allow that to happen. People show up. A wonderful little story, if I could share as an example. Yesterday, I went for a long bike ride. I'm an avid cyclist. And as I'm nearing the end, I'm only like maybe 2 kilometers from home, and I've already ridden, 125 kilometers from home. And this dark cloud comes over, and it just starts pouring rain. like Noah's Ark deluge. And there's a bridge up ahead, maybe 500 meters. So I start pedaling fast and say, oh, okay, I'm going to rest underneath the bridge, get some shelter. So I stopped there, and along comes, within about 30 seconds, what I'm to learn is a husband and wife couple who also were trying to get away from the storm, and they joined me. And as background, I was born and raised in Nova Scotia, Canada, a coastal province, and now living in Ottawa, and I have been for more than 25 years now. So here I am in Ottawa, having been born and raised in Nova Scotia, and it's a Sunday in May, and I've been out cycling, and I choose to rest under a bridge to protect me from the deluge of rain. And who comes along but this couple who are from where? Nova Scotia. And the city that I grew up in. And so we have this wonderful exchange. So for the next half hour, while it's downpouring, I have this wonderful exchange with these two delightful human beings from the same city that I grew up in, almost on the other side of the country. And I smiled afterwards. I just enjoyed the moment, as it was. This is great. We're talking. And then once the skies cleared up and I was cycling home, I just thought that was Holy Spirit led. I mean, that was just 100% from beginning to end. It was just, unmistakable. And those kinds of things happen more often in my life. And I've welcomed the opportunity to allow that kind of living to happen far more now with the Course in my life than prior to the Course in my life.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to think of here. So when you speak of going with the flow, and that A Course in Miracles supports that, are you referring to things like you need not plan, or are these types of things that A Course in Miracles speaks about, or what are you referring to when you speak of flowing with life? Because there's a lot of subjects and a lot of passages that speak in different ways about it. I'm wondering what particular passages are informing this.
I think that part of the text that informs that awareness and allowing for me is the 4th chapter of the Manual for Teachers, which is the characteristics of the teachers of God, and there's 10. And the first one is trust. And the other 9 are built upon the trust. And I can't remember specifically what it says, but what I take from it is to develop this trust, this faith, if we can use that word, that life is unfolding exactly as it should. That life is something that's happening for me, not to me. As I've heard the wisdom teaching share, life is happening for you, not to you. And while I don't always rise to the occasion, I do far more often than I used to. and certainly when I'm in my right mind, I'm much more open to trusting in life. And I'm much more open to trusting that even if I don't understand, I don't have to understand what's happening. I can just trust that it's going to be okay. I can trust that even if I don't understand the why of this, I can understand that the why is an empty question. Why is this happening to me? I'm much more likely to start to heal if I invite the exploration of, so what is this trying to teach me? Or what's in this for me? But not the, oh, woe is me, why? Well, it's why, because there's something here for me. There's something I'm to be learning from this. But I'm far more likely to just not even dive into that, just to trust and accept that, okay, when the time is right, it will reveal itself to me. It might be next minute, it might be next hour, it might be next week, next month, next year. And it could be a very, very long time off in the future before I get it. But just to trust as the first characteristic of the teacher of God, it talks about in chapter 4 of the manual for teachers.
Yeah, that's a good reference to look at. And one of the other characteristics of a teacher of God is open-mindedness. So, yeah, I think that's something that can be easily overlooked when people are a course student. That open-mindedness is a core characteristic of a teacher of God. And you mentioned the way people tend to discuss which version or which edition is the best and so on, and how there can be all kinds of debates about that. But when you read that section that is in every single one of the editions, open-mindedness is a characteristic of the teacher of God, then who's to judge which edition is better or less good or whatever it is? What's important is the message, and it's also the same thing you were speaking about. That it's not about the form; it's about the message. It's about the content. And so, I think that's really
I wanted to comment on that because I made the choice early on in studying the course that I wasn't going to get caught up in the discussion around this version, that version. This is the right way to do it. That's the right way to do it, because I experienced it so much growing up in the Roman Catholic tradition. I mean, which Bible was the right one to study from? And I remember feeling the divisive nature of that, which didn't make child, and then growing into adolescence, it made no sense to me, but it left an indelible mark on me. And so when it came to A Course in Miracles, and pretty early on, I became aware of, and I'm assuming that many students would experience the same thing. You become aware that there's these different versions, and then you get different proposed, I'll be polite, proposed approaches, to studying the course. And I just made the conscious decision that when it came to the version, the right one is, or the best one is the right one for you. The Dalai Lama, says which religion is the right one for you, the one that's, feels the best to you. That's the right religion for you. Well, to me, it's the same thing with the course. The version the best one for you is the one that feels right to you. Study from that one, or study from that one. And as for the approach, I took to heart, I can't remember where I read it specifically, but I took to heart the idea that the course should be studied in the way that is most comfortable for the student. And so if that means the text, and that's what speaks to you, then study the text. You know, if it's the workbook, then study to the exclusion of the text. That's fine. Then study the workbook. If it's the manual for teachers that you want to be the focus of your study, then study the manual for teachers. For me, it doesn't matter. You're going to learn what it is you want to learn and what you need to learn, understanding the old teaching, we don't always need what we want and we don't always want what we need. Whether it's the text, the workbook, the manual for teachers, or other related supplements, you will imbue and imbibe the teachings anyway.
Yeah, I think we could go further with that. There's another option is the talking with people, because talking about it, exchanging, and not everyone is a avid reader. So there's those, I'm sure, who are getting through the conversation with others. And since A Course in Miracles is all about relationships, it even tells the story of how it came about by the wish to heal relationships. So it's all about that. And I think that's a very prominent one, because it's also in A Course in Miracles, it speaks about it. You were speaking, that was one of the 3 things you got that you need to look at, relationships. And I would be fascinated to hear your take on
that. Another interesting question, Monaco. One of the things I needed to learn from that voice that told me, Rob, simplify your life, and then I extrapolated from that one of them was relationships, is I realized I needed to be a lot more honest in my relationships with people. Of course, I was to come to realize later in my study of the Course that it wasn't the other person that I needed to be more honest with. It was me I needed to be more honest with. And if I could be honest with me, then being honest with other people was no problem. An interesting paradox has emerged as I've continued my study with the Course. And I agree with you, discussion, exchange, dialogue with others studying the Course can be an invaluable way of studying the Course and learning the Course. I think I learned far more from other people in the study and discussion groups than they learned from me, just by virtue of the fact that there appears to be more of them than there is me. So I always tend towards listening more and speaking less. Of course, in this environment, the table is turned. But as the more I study the Course, the more I become oriented towards silence and stillness. It's pretty common in the study discussion groups that I host, which are 90 minutes, 3 times a week, 3 evenings a week. I open it up, I provide the introduction, read a poem from Helen Schuckman from her beautiful book, a poetry called The Gifts of God. We have our 5 minutes of silent meditation, and then I share the reading. And so all of that takes up probably 15. And then the space is opened up for comments and questions. And it's not uncommon that I don't have a word to say for the rest of, the hour and 15 minutes, the hour and 30 minutes that we're together. I've become increasingly content to let others talk. And because I truly believe in the wisdom saying that if we truly learn how to listen, everyone becomes their teacher. And over the years, because these study and discussion groups have been unfolding since 2009, over the years, there's course and group dynamic, that comes into, the gatherings, and, new people show up, and people are getting to know each other. They're getting to learn about one another, and sometimes frustrations arise. And when I'm approached by someone participating in the group about, and I'll be polite, their concerns about others' participation, my invitation is always, number one, patience. And number two, get curious. Get curious about the other. What is it they're telling you? There's the outward what they're telling you, but as we know in the Course, that's just an illusion. Get curious about what it is they're really telling you, and learn about them. It's amazing over the years what I've been able to learn about people just by listening, and what it is that's revealed. Always keeping in mind, however, that you never get the full picture, and don't get caught in the trap of thinking one day, oh, now I get it. Now I understand it all. No, you don't. You only understand what you understand up to that point. You don't have the whole picture, and that's okay. That's okay. But, relationships, circling back, I needed to be a lot more honest, that I could be more honest with the people I was in relationship with. And as you've, I think, inferred, if not explicitly stated, so much of what results in our dis-ease revolves around relationships with people. It could be our partners, our significant others, our spouses, our children, our parents, our siblings, our co-workers, the people we're involved with in the community. Not to sound trite, but those people who reach out to come to work with me in a psychotherapy capacity, 99.9%, what brings them to me is a relationship issue. It is rare that that's not what's at the heart of what is bringing us together. If not explicitly stated at the onset, that is certainly what reveals itself, as we work together. And it makes sense to me now far more than it used to. As to why that's the case, because it's not about the other. It's about our dis-ease about ourselves and our relationship with ourselves.
Yeah, there's all these puzzling aspects of it all. For instance, in my journey with A Course in Miracles, is I was told that I was a teacher of A Course in Miracles, and I hadn't read the book. And so, from within, and there was no, I have to read the book. I was the one saying I need to read it before I can speak about it at all with anyone. That it was not, that voice was not telling me to read it or even to look at it in any way. I was the one saying I have to know it, otherwise I can't teach anything. So I'm just saying, there's these different ways of encountering it and growing with it. And this attachment to the book is not the only way. It's one of the ways. And that's why I was saying, it can be, it doesn't even have to be course students. It's a course. It even says it. The curriculum is not optional. It's just the time at which we take it. And this curriculum is not the book itself. It's the world. It's the solution that, according to A Course in Miracles, it's the solution that was given the moment the idea of separation came up. That's the curriculum, the Holy Spirit. It's actually alive. It's the Spirit. It's our true nature, or the right mind, as you say it. So that's why, open-mindedness is always available when you say, okay, the learning is within us, and in which, there's so much about, focus on the book. Of course, now I've read it and I've looked at it and so on. But one of the most delightful things is the conversations we have. Like I'm getting to know so many wonderful people, whether they're into the course or not, in this, for instance, through the podcast. And, you never know. And it's like, please, do this. Yeshua, do this. Have a podcast. You've been wanting to do it since a long time. Do it. I want you to do it. And, I can't say whether it's my podcast or not, because I don't own it in the sense of owning it as being the one who knows what will be coming up or not. But so there is a guidance there. And so I encourage to get even more open when saying you can choose what you want to read in the book, but you could also choose how you want to get to know the curriculum, at which pace you do it and through what means, because it says means and end are the same. And in A Course in Miracles, and means and ends, we're speaking of, if you want love, then love, right? If you want to have a result being love, then love, right? Or whatever else. But the thing is, we already are love. It also says you can't, it isn't teaching love, because that's who you are. So it's just, trying to remind you of what you already know. So the thing is, there is no one who doesn't know that already, according to A Course in Miracles. So the recognition of that, and if you can recognize it in the form of A Course in Miracles, that's wonderful. But there's many other ways to recognize it as well. And some people get caught up about the words. And that's why I think it's wonderful that you immediately knew, okay, I'm not going to engage in discussing which version is better, or which way of going through it or whatever is better. I'm going to just find out what it is for me.
It's it has been curious observation, curious experience to witness and watch people in effect struggle with the Course because in many cultures, there is often a very prescribed way that we should learn things. Start at the beginning, go through to the end. You don't go to chapter 2 until you understand chapter 1. That kind of thing. This is very methodical. And I understand that mindset all too well because, as you may remember, when I told the story about being introduced to the Course, I started at chapter 1 and went to and it's now I can smile. Now I can smile with it when I have a conversation with someone who self-identifies as being new to the Course. I can appreciate and perhaps use the word empathize with their desire to do, okay, what's the right way to do this? How do you approach this? I get that. But just as you just shared, Wanako, try and emphasize to, take the approach, the method that's most comfortable for it's I can so much more today, again, just allow it to unfold and happen, than try and steer it, but just, let it happen. And if the person is called to join me or to join someone else in their study of the Course, it's gonna happen. They were led this far. They were led this far. If they're intended to be led further, they will be. And the other thing I emphasize to new students, teachers of the Course, is that if you enter into your journey with the Course and it's not resonating with you, then don't force it. You're on a path, and the Course has come into your path. Welcome it for as long as it serves you. And then when it doesn't anymore, just move on and accept it as a stepping stone in your continued journey, to grow in love, to grow in unity with the divine, and let it serve its purpose through you for as long as you need it to.
Yeah, in A Course in Miracles, it speaks of the voice for God as the gentle voice. It's gentle, so there's no force, no have-tos, no musts or this and that. It's all about remembering what already is true. So there's no, some people think, I could dilute it, I could change it, I could argue with it, I could this and that. We do all of that, but it won't change what is true. And so the beauty is you're actually allowed to go through all of that. And there's no idea that something would come and hit you over the head for that. Right? All you will get is gentleness. And anything that hurts or harms is just due to the way you are thinking about it, according to A Course in Miracles. And the way you think about it causes all this pain. And it wants to provide you with a means that is gentle. Because the gentleness is the means, the result is gentleness. And then you become gentle as well. Or you recognize that you can be gentle, because we don't know that all the time. There's so many times where we're acting so harshly and mean and angry and righteously and so on, that we tend to forget that we actually have a gentle nature. Our nature is gentle.
Again, you're very intuitive, because I think one of the things that attracted me so much to the Course was its gentle nature, was its teaching around the gentleness in which God teaches his curriculum through the Course. And I can't remember I can't remember if it's in the Course specifically, and if you can remember, please say so, Wanaka, or if it's an analogy or a symbolism that I read somewhere else that points to the Course. But it's like you're a baby bird, and you're getting ready to leave the nest as a symbol of leaving heaven. Mom or dad is there at the edge of the nest, kind of going, okay, go ahead. You want to fly off on your own? Okay, go ahead. And I'm just gonna wait here, though. Just to remember, you can come back. At any time. But off you fly to, do what it is you think you need to do, and that very gentle approach that the Course has is so appealing to me. And I'm paraphrasing here, but there is a part in the Course where it speaks of your Father waits for you gently at home while you live in exile in your dream, something like that. But the idea that, God realizes you need to do what you need to do, but it's just quietly and patiently and gently, just waiting in effect until you come to your senses, but just letting you do what you need to do. And there's just this all the teaching is bathed in this gentle message that it doesn't, no matter what you do, you're going to be welcomed back with open arms. There's nothing you can do that won't result in you being welcomed back. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful, approach.
I think this is another topic that we're coming to, is this unconditional love that you're speaking of. You are always at home, right? There's no way that you could be rejected for anything or any reason. And so the Course is all about remembering how to recognize this, right? Because we're so used to saying, it says also, because of the idea of separation, we think we did something that cannot be redeemed, cannot be corrected, cannot be put back in order. So in order to keep from having to face ourselves thinking that we've been so evil, we actually beat ourselves up for it. And where we came from, the source we came from, the Creator, or however we call it, and of course it speaks of the Creator, it never even rejected us. And so all this rejection is simply more of the separation thinking. It has nothing to do with an actual truth. And so it also says, the voice for God is based on truth. And the ego, the voice we made up to uphold separation, is based on something that isn't true. The idea that we could be separate from our source, from our creator, from who we are. And you can't be separate from who you are, according to A Course in Miracles. It's not possible. And so this message of you are not separate from who you are, so what are you beating yourself up for? It can only be illusions. And to ponder that, how gentle that idea is, there is nothing you need to beat yourself up for. That is a gentle idea, isn't it?
Beating ourselves up, to use the term, is something paradoxically we do a lot of. The guilt we feel, the shame we feel, those two core and root, emotions are very much rooted in this idea of beating ourselves up. And the psychological paradox is they don't help. It doesn't help us to feel guilty, to feel shame. Yet we tend to almost default to those modes of thinking about ourselves. When, as you so beautifully shared, it in our perfection, shame and guilt is simply not possible. I think the Course talks about it. I know other luminaries do when they speak of the Course. But, we're not how does it say it? We're afraid of our magnificence. We're afraid of how great we actually are. And our hesitancy to love ourselves blocks these gifts, these potentials of magnificence that lies within us. Oh, now I know what it says. We're not afraid of our littleness. We're afraid of our magnificence. And the Course invites us not to let trick ourselves into thinking that to think of myself as magnificent is arrogant. But to think of myself as magnificent is a natural way of being, a birthright of sorts.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. And another way A Course in Miracles says it is that we are infinitely valuable in the mind of God.
There are so many teachings that the Course offers that can seem to turn our world upside down. That gives us a completely, 180, if I can use that number, view, just completely opposite way of looking at things. And that's throughout the text, but it's the very essence of the workbook, of guiding us through this process of deconstructing in part one the way we currently see the world through guilt, through shame, resulting in dis-ease, and building us back up of sorts to revision the world we live in through the heart. And so there's so much, and just one foundational teaching I'm thinking of is the idea of, the principle of scarcity, that I've got to acquire as much as I can because there's a limited amount of whatever it is, and the Course tries to instill in us that, the only way to keep anything is by giving it away. And what I found in my life is that there's really only one thing that once I have it, I do want to give it away, and that is love. And I know in giving it away, it's going to come back. But I know I can extend it, to use the Course's term, because the only way you can give something is if it does originate in you. But this is just one example, the scarcity principle of where the Course just turns it upside down. Not to mention its whole teachings around the body and our relationship to our body. But there's so many examples of where it just completely flips,
Yeah, let's do a short, quick view of something that I think is very curious. Of course, we are taught that to be ashamed or to feel guilty is good if you did something that, according to the world or to the surrounding, is evil. And if you don't, then you will be doing all kinds of evil things. Because those people who do so many things that we just consider as criminal and so on, they're doing it because they don't feel guilty or shame. Now, A Course in Miracles is saying the opposite. When you don't feel guilty and don't feel ashamed, then you're going to be kind. You're gentle and you're loving. Now, maybe you want to say something quickly about that, but I think that's really curious because it's really saying the opposite of what we're told.
To me, it points towards the Course's teachings about sin, and that any action that brings about anything other than love or missing the mark, okay, and that would be the definition in many other milieux of sin, okay, is not worthy of punishment, but merely of choosing differently the next time. If you're aware of these devolving emotions, guilt, shame, whatever, I shouldn't have done that, I just feel awful, then that's your cue. Just choose differently the next time. That's all the Course asks you to do. Forgive yourself in the moment. Let go of the past. It can't hurt you. And prepare yourself to choose differently the next time.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on that. I always considered it as changing your mind about it. But yes, it also could be considered as a way of acting differently the next time. I was always thinking of it as changing your mind. But yes, of course that leads to acting differently. But maybe you act the same and feel differently about it So it's not exactly clear on that point. You may actually act exactly the same and feel totally different. So, yeah, but I think it's a curiosity when it comes to the Course's psychology that not feeling sinless, feeling holy is what gets you to be kind and loving and to show that as your true nature, show who you are. So now it's time to wrap up. So is there any question I didn't ask that you'd like to answer before we wrap it up? Okay. Then I'll ask you, how can people reach you if they want to reach you? Of course, we'll put it in the show notes. We'll give them those links, but maybe verbally first.
If people did want to reach out to me directly, of course, they could reach out to me through you. But if they wanted to reach out to me by email, probably the best way. The email address is the first letter of my first name, R, and my last name, Meagher, at servingyourjourney, all one word.com. So it looks like Meagher at servingyourjourney.com, or the website address is servingyourjourney.com, and through there you can contact me through the contact page.
And as I mentioned earlier, Robert has a Facebook ACIM page as well, through which you can reach him. So anyways, so thank you so much, Robert, for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, listening, and participating in any way you feel called to. Please leave a review of the podcast, subscribe to it, and let people know about it, because it's really so much that I'm learning through it, and I believe it's also valuable to anyone else that is interested in it. And if you want to be a guest, please reach out to me, because I'm open to hearing whatever way has led you and guided you in what you feel is helpful and want to share. So thank you so much, and blessings. Till next time.